So if you could travel anywhere in time, where would you go? And more specifically, when would you go? So would you go back to an amazing historical event? Maybe for the romantics in the room, you might go back and revisit your first kiss. Or maybe you would revisit a loved one who's long since passed. My job entails thinking about deep time. And so my interest would be in traveling back in time to a place that's that's very difficult to measure on a human scale, but is measured in sediment and geology. So if you'll bear with me, I have a metaphor for a time I'd like to try it on you. But it's one of the most difficult things in my work is to try and get your head around immense periods of time. And so we're going to use the humble penny. So let's think of one penny as 1 year. 10 pennies, 10 years. 50 pennies, my age, almost my age, 50 years. That's pretty straightforward stuff, right? Well, let's take it back a little bit further. The extinction of the mammoths. 12,000 years ago, our stack of pennies would be 60 feet tall. If we think even more, if we take a much greater leap back in time to the extinction of the dinosaurs, 65 million years ago, our stack of pennies increases to 60 miles high. So this is one of the most mind-blowing parts of my job, is trying to conceive of immense spans of time. The job entails making sculptures for natural history museums of sometimes very, very ancient animals, and sometimes absolutely immense animals, like this Camarasaurus for the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. That can be done in a variety of materials, like this bronze Colombian mammoth that I made for the Omaha Zoo that I installed earlier this year. And not only does it involve working with paleontology, but also archaeology. This is Pompeii, which most of you are very familiar with. And I was commissioned by the National Geographic Society to recreate 4 of the ash figures. And this exhibit just happened to open at Union Station last week. And so 4 of those models are on display at Union Station. In 79 AD, when Vesuvius erupted, the ash fell over the city, blanketing every building and person who was there. As that ash solidified around the bodies and the flesh, soft tissues decomposed, it solidified and packed around the bodies. When it was eventually excavated, Fiorelli, with the head excavator and archaeologist, found voids in the ash that had bones in them. So he was clever enough to actually pour plaster into those voids, and that encapsulated the skeletons, and then recreated essentially the death pose of those people. So it's a very powerful place, and laying down in the ash right next to these people, the same ash that they died in, is one of the experiences that I always pinch myself about. Is just I constantly get these amazing life experiences in this process, and that's the replica that you'll see. One of the replicas that you'll see at Union Station. It also involves creating forensic reconstructions. So this is a standard. This is anatomically modern human. This is a skull that was found in the Sahara Desert in a place called Gobero by a paleontologist at the time, Dr. Paul Serena from the University of Chicago, And we can use modern skin depth tissue averages to determine where our the skin depth at certain places, and we have these ratios for really big groups of people. And so working on modern humans, it's very easy to, not easy, it's very labor intensive, but it's a straightforward process because it's been refined and refined. And so this is the final product based on a very, very long amount of time working on clay, making a mold of that clay and then casting it and then punching individual hairs into that sculpture to recreate the face and hopefully the vision, a believable visage of the person who lived at the time. So artists have always been strongly influenced by their surroundings. Altamira Cave houses some of the oldest cave paintings and the oldest art in the world. It's 36,000 years old. And already look at the level of accomplishment and prowess by the artist's hand here. Well, I'm exactly the same way. I'm super excited about being outside and making first-hand discoveries. So I am a research associate at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, where I go out and dig every year, a couple of times a year. And this is at a site, this is a mastodon lower jaw found up in Snowmass, Colorado. And as part of this, I find I get a huge amount of fuel from these experiences. So you get to have a bit of adventure with the art. So it's also a really focused time with scientists. So you have conversations that you never have in any other situation because you're sharing meals together, you're trying to survive. Basically, this is a helicopter camp. They helicopter water in, and you have to carry everything on your back for that week and a half that you're there. And it took us 3 days just to get into where we started hiking. So, and then we had to rebuild the road 3 times. So it's a true Western adventure. So why make the effort to create, to dig up these bones? Well, they go back to the museum collections. They are then assembled. And hopefully, if you're lucky, you get a skeleton as beautiful as this. And if you can work with a fossil that is as complete as this is the skull of an animal that was found in Kansas. You have the ability to create a sculpture like this. This is now on display at the Sternberg Museum in Hays, Kansas, very close to where it was discovered. So it starts with the skeleton. So a skeleton is like a framework. It's like the 2x4s in the house. It's the architecture of the animal. And you look at the skeleton and you look at the individual elements in minute detail because each one of those things can give you clues as to the outward appearance of that animal. You look at the biological context of it, so look at the geology of the time that the animal was around. This is where it was found in the country of what is now Niger, 110 million years ago. And we look at the bones and the muscle scars on those bones so that we can actually put soft anatomy over the top of that. You can also use tools like blacklight to look at soft tissues that you might not be able to see under the naked eye or with the naked eye. And we look at modern animals or that might not be a perfect analogy for what we're trying to do, but they might have similar body proportions. So a pelican and a pterosaur are very, very similar, but they have a very similar lifestyle, but then their anatomy is also very, very proportionally similar. You also look inside of animals. I do a lot of dissection work so that I can back up my restoration. So unless you know what that animal looks like on the inside, there's no way you can faithfully restore it on the outside. And it starts with a very simple armature that mimics the skeleton in its proportions. Just makes it look really fast and easy. And this is just the clay sculpture. So once the clay is done, we have to be able to make it, and this model has to hang over the surface, or over the heads of museum visitors. So you have to be able to make it safe and lightweight and last longer than I do. So it's always a trick. The clay is an oil-based clay, so it never hardens. We make a mold of it. We make a cast of that, and then that cast has to be painted. And there's certain things we know about fossil animals, and there's a lot we don't. And one of those things is color, and in some instances, we're now starting to actually be able to get fossil evidence for the color of certain dinosaurs, which is a new finding just in the last 5 years. But I tend to be fairly conservative when it comes to color, because if I were to paint my pterosaur this color, it automatically becomes unbelievable. So the whole idea is to have a feasible restoration. So if you paint outlandish breeding colors on it, it automatically becomes unfeasible as a creature. So, and already this animal is pretty unfeasible in its proportions. So it shows to use some more muted colors. Now, this has created this effect. This lightly haired effect is created by punching the hairs on individually. So if you take a needle and you chop the top of it off, of the eye off, then it gives you a fork. You can take the fork and the hair, push it down onto the hair, and punch it into the material, pull the needle out, and it leaves the hair. So if you do that 30 or 40,000 times, then you're totally done. Very simple process. And then this is the final product with the paleontologist Paul Serino who found it. There's also a lot of things that we can tell using, once again, black light, even the vein structure in the wings. And then this is, I often have a lot of pictures of things hanging in my driveway. This is when we lived in Colorado, and my neighbors walking by and wondering what we were up to that day. There's always some amazing experiences. So Paul Serino, the fellow we just saw, a paleontologist, also commissioned me, along with National Geographic, to recreate one of his finds from Niger, which is a 40-foot long crocodile. So you see here, this is a large American crocodile in proportion to this fossil croc. And this animal's skull is 6 feet long. And once again, I look at modern crocodilians doing dissection work to back up the soft tissues that I place over the top of the fossils. And I also had the experience of going out and catching crocodiles with a biologist in Costa Rica and measuring crocs, which I highly recommend if you ever get the chance. It is so amazing to feel these animals and understand the power of their limbs, their tails, how dangerous they are. And we did DNA sampling of one section of the tail. We did measurements, and then of course let them go. So, but it's the closest I'll ever get to being able to touch and feel a dinosaur. So the restoration in this case started with just a simple plywood armature. That's covered with mesh, and then clay. We add the skull cast to ensure accuracy. And we're at about 1,500 pounds of clay right here. And then slowly the soft tissue details are sculpted in over the surface of that. National Geographic did a special on this particular animal, and so it made one of their best of collections, and so it is continually, it still gets played every once in a while, so it's been one of those projects that's really been great, and a lot of people respond to it because they've seen it. So once again, this is a oil-based clay, and we can't actually travel that clay around, so we have to make a mold of it and cast it in another material. And so it's set in quadrants, and then rubber is sprayed on that The style is very important in the studio, you can see. And then beyond that, a fiberglass jacket is put over the surface of that. It's broken into sections. And then these sections have fiberglass cast into them. So essentially what you have is a big fiberglass, very lightweight crocodile. It's very similar to boat construction. So if you've ever seen the inside of a boat, a fiberglass boat, we could flip this thing over a road if we needed to. But it makes well, I should talk about the logistical challenge. We had to actually ship this to Sydney, Australia. So it had to go in a plane. So I made 2 life-size 40-foot crocodiles, 3 full-size heads in 16 weeks. And from measuring the fossil to delivered. And it was a heck of a trick. FedEx was the sponsor, and so they wanted to overnight it to Sydney as one of the deals. And so everything had to fit inside of an air cargo crate. And so that made it fairly tricky. This sculpture ended up being shipped to over 23 countries, and is actually probably very much more well-traveled than I am. We fit 7 people inside of its belly. We tried to jam as many in there as we could.
You tried it?
And then I've been lucky enough to be invited or take part in a number of announcements, scientific announcements at National Geographic, and also given a number of lectures there. And it's always a treat to present there and be involved. So technology has really changed how I can produce things from doing traditional wood armatures. And we can now create a clay sculpture like this and do a 3D scan of it. Take that 3D data and send it to a CNC milling machine that can produce parts like this. So I get these big chunks of dinosaur shipped to me, cargo, just after emailing them a file, and then we can assemble them over steel armature, and then create a skin, an epoxy skin, and then take it apart, of course, because this particular dinosaur goes to Ankara, Turkey, to the National Museum of Natural History there. And so this is your dinosaur kit, all ready to take it apart and put back together. Before you paint it, you always do that and fit it in the crate before you paint. I've found that to be a really good recipe for success. This is in Ankara, Turkey. I love this picture for just one reason alone, because, well, 2 reasons. One, we didn't actually have the ability to lift it up as I had been with a hoist in my studio. So they just got the entire museum out, and we just lifted the whole thing up with a bunch of hands. But this guy is smoking a cigarette right here as we do it. So this doesn't usually meet normal museum protocol. But
have you done both pieces there?
the other piece is the skeletal piece. That was there existing. In fact, that was the driver for doing the flesh model. Yeah. So sometimes I get to sculpt really large animals, and this is a Camarasaurus. It's 60 feet long and 34 feet tall, and this is about the size of 2 bull elephants. The logistics of doing stuff like this aren't as much fun because when you're doing small scale, it's very easy to work on tabletop size stuff, but there's nothing you can move on this thing without a forklift or a crane. So, and it's primarily steel and foam with a plastic skin, but it can still kill you. So it's one of those things that, and it creates a whole new set of logistics because you actually have to route, the passage of this thing around overpasses power lines, and it's just stuff you never really had to think about before, or I didn't have to think about before. This is the counterpart to it, an animal also from Colorado, Colorado native called Ceratosaurus. So just when I finished that, I thought, oh, I'm off the bucket list, right? I don't have to do that. Life size, one of the biggest dinosaurs ever. 6 months later, I get a call from the Indianapolis Children's Museum, and they're like, we want you to do the biggest dinosaur ever made. So this is Brachiosaurus, and it's 75 feet long and 53 feet tall. And this is in Kearney. This is right after we moved there. And to get a sense of the scale, I always have to point this out, that this is a human, that's me. And this is not an OSHA-approved move, by the way. But of course, when you're doing this stuff, you have to make sure everything fits before you get on site. So I test fit everything before we paint, and then load it up on 2 full semis with special semis that ride low to the ground before we can install. My neighbors were people screeching, like stopping in the road. We're far from the road, but it was so tall that people were just, literally the brakes were screeching to stop and look what it was. So. And to make this a little bit more complicated, it actually is up against glass, and it's lifting the roof off of the building. So it goes through glass and is leaning up against glass, but not exactly touching it, because in the engineering of it, the dinosaur moves at a different rate, the building moves at a different rate because of wind. And so you have to be very careful about how it's engineered. And we hired an engineer to do that work, because it was a little too complicated for me.
What kind of engineer?
A structural engineer.
You said Kearney, is that Nebraska or
Missouri.
Missouri?
Just
I remember that, that's where I grew up.
So that building is in Kearney?
Oh, it's in Indianapolis.
Oh, no,
Yep,
That's
yep.
where it built.
This is the
Built it
install.
at his house, okay.
Yeah.
I was, I'm like, well, please, we take a filter from there.
Did you do the little one also?
I did, yeah. It's sort of inexplicable. It's like a 22 foot long baby that the director was adamant that the mother would be lifting the roof up and have the baby getting in. But to me, I'm always trying to ground it in reality and develop an actual scenario that would have a baby flying through the roof at 53 feet. And so it was maybe some would call it an argument, but I lost because he's the director of the museum. So at any rate, so I get to work on a really wide variety of things. This is one of the most interesting animals that I've worked on. This is a 4-winged dinosaur. So this is from Liaoning province in China. I was lucky enough to go to China 2 years ago to look at some of these specimens. And we're working on a big feathered tyrannosaur right now, a 30-foot long animal from China that I also got to see when I was there. But this is a really wacky, weird animal. And because essentially it has 4 sets of wings, and the feathers on the feet are highly derived feathers, and they're just like primary feathers on the arms. So it was a real trick. And this is one of the animals that they have actually fossil color represented in these things called melanosome sites. So there's little individual structural elements of color that are preserved in the feathers that you can see with the scanning electron microscope. The thing that's really wild about creating one of these things is almost the definition of insanity, because you take chicken skins that are the right color and you individually pluck the feathers off of the chicken skin, organize them, and then glue them back on one by one onto the model. So you're completely deconstructing one bird so that you can build another bird. I've been very lucky to work, over the last 20 years with National Geographic on a number of projects, and one that I worked on recently was a reconstruction of the mummy of King Tut. So most people think of King Tut as, when they have the visage of him, it's this mask. But the reality is this is King Tut. So this is a CT scan. This is digital data from a medical scan of his mummy. And you can see, is actually very broken up and damaged. And that's because when Howard Carter removed him from his sarcophagus, he used all manner of things to basically break him out of the mask that he was in, and also unwrap him to get to some of the artifacts that he was buried with. So this digital data is really interesting to look at because you can see there's actually these landmark rings, and those are part of the scan data, but when you print it, you actually get a dual artifact from the printing. So you have to be very careful about what happens when you work digitally with medical scans, and it's a bit of a learning curve. So the process was, we took that digital data, sent it to a company in Leuven, Belgium, who has the ability to print the entire thing at one time. And while they were printing it in Belgium, I went to Egypt and was able to go down into the tomb and take measurements from the mummy, and then use those measurements and photographs that I took of the mummy to help recreate it. You can see it's a really complicated thing because the goal is, of course, to make it as accurate as possible so people who would never have the chance to go to Egypt otherwise would feel like they're looking at the real thing. And part of the experience, of course, is going to Egypt is bartering. And while we were looking for some of the cloth that was wrapped around the thing, we ended up in this, it was at least a 4-hour negotiation to try and purchase this fabric that matched the weave size perfectly. And so this is Mustafa, the guy who was kind enough to put up with me while I was there, and our fabric dealer, who obviously at this point in negotiation, we were not making any headway at all. But I finally stopped being an American and just kind of chilled out and really enjoyed the whole experience of it, because I was in such a rush to get there, such a rush to gather my data. And then we probably had 8 glasses of tea while we were there. Anyway, it ended up being almost comical, but it was just great because we'd go off for a break and he'd come back, and then, anyway, it was just great. So when I came back, we did this. This is the 3-dimensional print. And of course it looks like glass. Well, that's not what we want, so we have to be able to try and make it look like the actual mummy itself. So I sculpt the individual surface details gathered from the reference and photographs that I took. And then that's the final model. This model was also on display at Union Station. Another mummy, I've been lucky enough to work on a lot of mummies, and one of the most famous mummies, that's a find that's just 20 years old this year, is the find of the Iceman in the Otel mountain range in Italy. Now, he was discovered by 2 hikers, and after radiocarbon dating, he's 5,300 years old. He was murdered by being shot with an arrow, and that arrowhead is still in his shoulder. And after being commissioned to do this, a producer friend of mine got wind of it and asked if maybe it would be interesting to follow it, and then that got some wheels, and then Nova was involved. And so it turned out to be a very big deal to gain access to the mummy in the freezer, because it's just not done very often. And about twice a year, basically, they'll pull the mummy out so that they can spray water over it and hydrate it. just so that what happens, because it goes from a solid to a gas, and it can freeze or burn essentially. And this is a one of a kind. This is a sample size of one, and it's been a very powerful artifact in the way that it has given us an insight to life 5,300 years ago. One of the most amazing things about him is that he was covered with 61 tattoos. So not only are they in areas where he may have experienced chronic pain, there's also some symbols. There's only two intersecting lines, or tattoos that have intersecting lines in them. So he has them in the lower back, lower knees, ankles, wrist, and on his chest. And two of those were just discovered this last year using black light or multispectral light to look at him. Because they weren't able to fit his whole body in the scanner, I had to do this process called photogrammetry to capture the digital shape of his hand so I could reproduce it with the rest of the print. And so I had a very rough capture, and then we were able to actually add that section back into the 3D print. These are part of the, was one of the days, this is one of the best days I had in the studio, and part of this process of filming for Nova. This is recreating his tattoos using pig skin. So we use pork belly and sharpened bone points and carbon from fire mixed with water to recreate basically stick and poke tattoos. So now I can tattoo if anyone's interested. I have the ability to make very bad tattoos on people. But it was a really fun day. It's called experimental archaeology. You have an idea about how something should work, how they did it back in time, and then you try and replicate it. And I went on to build a bunch of his artifacts that he was found with. And I wasn't getting paid to build those things. It was just because I was so fascinated by them. I had to try them out and see what they were like. And because I got such rare access to all of his artifacts, I had an amazing amount of reference to go from. So one of the biggest challenges of creating it is this section, the hip. The hip was damaged in two ways. It was damaged by its recovery, but it was also scavenged by animals at a couple different times during when it was revealed and the ice melted away. Animals found it and chewed on it because there's actually teeth marks on the hip where it broke and spalled off. In fact, when I was in the freezer, I pointed out the tooth marks and I said, "Do you have an inner tooth distance on that? We can tell the species of the animal, at least categorize it with the tooth distance." And he looked at me, because it was one of my first questions, and he says, "You're an artist?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Okay." So it was the one, and then all of a sudden he just opened up to me, and we were in there. We were only supposed to be in there for a half hour, in there for like an hour and a half, because he just kept saying, "Oh, now we could check this out. This is amazing. Check this out over here." And then he'd flip them over for me, and it was amazing. So this is a short video that I made and shot of this experience of making it. So you have to put on scrubs to even go into this space. These are all the slices assembled to create the 3D print. So laser shot into a vat of photoreactive resin, and then over about 28 hours builds up the entire print of the mummy. print holds volumes very, very accurately, but it does not capture surface detail very well. So that's my job, to recreate all of the very minute details. And then of course we have to make a mold of it, so we're required to make 3 casts of this particular sculpture. So each layer is just built up with artist oils very slowly, and then those individual tendons are built one at a time. And then I ended up gluing thousands of them on to recreate that damaged area. So the artist's job is to connect threads, to pull things together, to see parallels where they may not be very obvious. It's the artist's job to tease out the details of the past so that we can look back in time, whether that be through the animals that live there or our distant ancestors. So I just basically tried, this is the first time I've done this talk, or tried to do this talk. So I'd be very interested, in particular, to hear about your thoughts related to, one, penny metaphor, because I just made that up. And it took me a while to figure out the math to figure that thing out, but how tall that would be. But and any other thoughts you might have. But first, if I can answer any questions you would have about any of this work, I'd be more than happy to do that.
How many projects do you do usually at once? Do you have like one project for like a year, or do you have like 3 or 4 going at a time?
So I've 5 museum contracts running concurrently right now. So 7 employees. So and 2, and I'm working in 2 shops right now, which is not the way to do it. And I slept 3 hours last night.
2 shops, 2 shops on the same land or in different locations?
Different locations. So.
Whoa.
So yeah, that's going to change. We're going to move over to a bigger shop, but it's with the Iceman project that was seen by over a lot of people, 5 million or so people, and so it's kind of raised awareness of the studio and work that we do there. But we're just already in the last week I bid on a 50-foot piece for the Smithsonian, 2 mammoths, and we've got right now in the studio. Tomorrow I get the director from the Whitty Museum will be there we've got a 30-foot pterosaur that I was working on right before I came here. And then we also have another 30-footer a feathered meat-eating dinosaur that we're working on that has like 55,000 feathers on it. So we have a lot of things going, and it's too much, really. So I have to you learn how to say no. But being a freelance artist, you end up being to kind of just take everything. Trying, but I need to get to the point where I'm better at not doing that. Anyway, yeah.
So you obviously cannot do all this yourself. You have to have
I have studio assistants.
archaeologists. Well, what type of degrees? You don't just find an artist that paints portraits.
Yeah, well, the people who, so I produce, I work with a scientist who And I'll have that dialogue with them in order to, and that's actually the vernacular was the hardest part for me. It took years of reading scientific papers and hanging out with scientists to try and speak to them, just to formulate intelligent questions for them, so that you weren't just asking the most basic things, you know. And that was tough for me. But now I can because I'm constantly studying anatomy and trying to ask the right questions about context, geology, and anatomy. It works. And so I formulate the prototypes, and so when I have people who work for me, though most of the work is in reproduction. So I'll make a clay sculpture. I do the science, have the dialogue, make the clay sculpture. I can't make all the clay sculptures because they're too big, physically too big. Like this thing we're working on, you know, we've got 1,000 pounds of clay on it. So and it's thin, but so you need skilled people, but they don't necessarily need to be scientists. They can be artists first, or artisans, or craftspeople. That helps. Having a huge interest in natural history helps a lot, because if they're passionate about it, I can teach them anything. If they dig it, you know, if they love it, then they'll do very well. So, yeah.
Atlas?
This is afarensis, so very similar to Atlas. So this is actually traveled with the actual bones of Lucy for the Houston Museum of Natural Sciences. So that was an intimidating project to work on, because the stack of literature written about her is taller than she is. I mean, and none of them agree about certain anatomical aspects of it. So, but it was fun, really fun to work on. I love working on that stuff.
So my question is about the aesthetics of beauty and how it goes.
Oh yeah.
Obviously, she's beautiful.
Yeah.
There's a lot of sensitivity, and she's beautiful.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if you have any having. I mean, obviously, if you've made her beautiful, you would pursue beauty with any combination. So I was wondering what your thoughts are upon our state, where we're at right now, where we have really no sense of our past, what we look like in the past, and what we think is beautiful.
Yeah, that's a really cool question, because there's a lot of I've done a lot of work. You know, there's a great book called Survival of the Most Beautiful, or Survival of the Beautiful. Then it talks about symmetry, you know, and our interest in seeing symmetry in mates, and desire for beauty as a representation of fitness. And the book is very interesting on a biological level, where it addresses these things. So my quest, when I'm trying to create these things, is to have people have a string of empathy. So have some connectivity. And so this is a number of scientists have talked to me about this, about their personal wishes to make things beautiful. So they have an agenda, because they want people to like what they do and have it be appealing to them. So as a way into understanding the past. So it's a really super complicated and fun thing to talk about, because it's got so many layers.
Grasshopper and robots.
Exactly, yeah. So whatever direction you choose to go in. But there's I worked with anthropologists from Houston on this, and there are a lot of things that are hard and fast rules for forensic reconstructions, and a lot of that stuff you can't deny. There's soft tissue stuff that you can always, in another world, you don't know, you can't ever tell. So, ears, for instance, you don't know what ears look like. So, there's no false representation for ears. So it's totally interesting.
Any projects haunt you?
Haunt me, oh gosh. That darn Brachiosaurus lifting the roof up in Indianapolis.
Well, you know that could be. That's not relative.
Yeah, I think that one bugs me for that very reason. So, but anyway.
Any projects hard to let go of?
You know, the famous statement that artists don't finish work, they abandon it, you know. So I could work on any single project that I have for a year, you know, straight, but the practicality of it is it's just like, it's a business, so you have deadlines, and, you know, we have things to make and a timeline to do it in, and so I'm constantly struggling with that bit of it sometimes, but you always have to, you're just mostly happy to see them go out the door, because you've spent so much time on them. You become part of it. In fact, I always put like there's some of my hair in that. The Iceman has one of my eyelashes because he only had one eyelash, so I plucked one of my eyelashes and glued it in. You know, you send part of yourself with everything. I do it literally in these cases. Yeah.
We took a group of students from Paseo to the Arts Incubator on a career discovery with Prep KC one day, and it was fascinating that while the art was important to talk about, all of them were able to talk about it, also the business aspect. Yeah. And I thought it was really super eye-opening for kids, not so much at our high school level, not so much what they're concerned about of getting through a drawing or ceramics class or whatever that, but it was, they were like, I didn't know you had to think about all these things, you know, that I had to submit when the commission was out there, I had to submit this, I had to do the plan, I had to do the work, I had to know what it hold up, I had to know legally, and just they went on, and it was fascinating to know that was a whole nother world. If they were going to do this as a profession, then they also had to excel in that profession as well.
Yeah.
Or that side of the profession.
Museums are a really interesting business. They're interesting businesses to work for because they're pretty much grant driven, and so and they're slow, which is fine. Because I'm pretty slow for the most part working on projects, and I like that speed, and I like to be able to do research and try and do the best I can do. But yeah, it's definitely there's a learning curve when it comes to trying to figure out how to make it work as a business. So sometimes it'll be better than other times.
If you didn't have to earn a living, what would you do?
It'd certainly be, well, I hate plastics, which is ironic because I work with plastics all the time. We talked about this before the talk, that I find that one of the greatest ironies of this process is that I got into it because I love nature and love being outside, and I spend most of my time with a mask on dealing with plastics. So if I could find something that would put me outside around animals, I think I'd be happiest, maybe like a wildlife videographer. But sculpture, I have to make sculpture. So even when I'm, completely swamped with commissions, I'm still making sculpture. So, and that's what I steal. I steal time from other projects to make because you have to be able to do that because this stuff is so technical and so structured that it sometimes can be a little tough to work on because it has such a regiment to it. But I'm always making my own stuff, so it's good. It feels me.
I've got a question about finding out this color in fossils.
Right.
I'm just wondering if you mentioned you're conservative and you use some new color so that it stays feasible
Exactly.
to people's brains.
Right.
Have they found evidence of bright colors that stayed away from bright colors and colors?
The only places that they found in these particular specimens in China, there's probably about 5 different fossil birds or bird dinosaurs, they're basically the same, where they have colors represented. And so the curious part of it is that all of the colors come in essentially 4 groups. So there's red, white, black, and brown. So I did a reconstruction of one of those, and they had sampled it from all parts of the body, so we stayed just dead true to the whole thing. So it looks like a woodpecker, basically. It's got really bright red here, and then it's got these beautiful black and white structures, but it doesn't have proper wings. It's got a kind of a, wings were used for display because they didn't have flight feathers on them. So yeah, so that one, yeah, you have to stick with it. If they don't have any evidence, I'll use modern. There are some patterns in nature, so counter shaded. Usually, like if you look at a fish or a reptile, they're darker on the back and lighter on the belly. So I'll kind of stick with that as a basic idea, and then try and look at other animals. I never want to copy a living animal exactly, but I'll use them as a guideline maybe, and they kind of have some fun with it. So, yeah.
Do you ever get any leeway, like just personal, that when the company did the Belgian, the man,
Yeah, the ice
the Iceman. I loved the way it looked. I work in glass. I loved the way it looked, sheer and.
Isn't that neat?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you ever have any leeway to present it in that way?
I just had a guy write me about that actually last week about trying to do it as as a contemporary piece, just to have it printed and then put that on display. So yeah, when the client and their final use for it is what drives the whole process. So they might be open to it. In fact, along those lines, they did a sample print of the head, gave it to me, and then I gave it to them because it's so cool looking. Because it looks like glass. And they ended up putting that on display just as the head, so it gives you sort of a step in the process.
If you, not necessarily could change, but had a thought about how we talk to kids about science and art or teach it, what would you say? Any advice, any thoughts?
I would say to tell the kids that that science and art aren't as different as they think, and that it's the same process. The best scientists that I know are as good as the best artists that I know in coming up with creative solutions to problems and ideas, and generating ideas. So I think they're a lot closer than people realize. So but unfortunately they've classically been partitioned. So
Would you be open to like a small group of students to do like a studio tour or something like that?
I will do. I got really overwhelmed after the Nova project, so I did. Have you been to the studio? I recognize your face, and I can't remember if you've been to the studio or not. We had tons of people coming up after that. So I'm going to try and keep it quarterly because it's got to the point where I can't handle doing all the tours. So yeah, so I'm going to do it quarterly and then I post it on social media. Yeah, so it seems to be the best scenario.
Did we get you your answers that you wanted on your page?
Yeah, well, if anyone has any better time analogies or metaphors, sorry, I'm up for them.
I think it's great, and from the theater side of this, I'm going to look around for a clear tube that I can get you some length that the pennies can be in when you want to do the long one. So I'm going to take that on as my project when I find it, or it just shows up leaning against your door someday. But I think that's so cool, but I want to see if I can do one of the big ones for you, just so the kids will go, that's a lot of pennies.
Yeah. They're better than pennies, so.
I just got to find the clear tube, which I think I know where to find it.
Yeah. There's a lot of great, there's lots of great ways to think about it.
Maybe, could you tell us how much money would be the tallest one would be?
No, I didn't.
That may be a good example.
Oh, okay. I'll do that. $1,000, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think it's, yeah.
How many pennies?
Like
That makes a
Okay.
bigger impact on
Okay.
Since you're about mathematical numbers and all that, can I pick your mind about a totally different subject on Planet X or whatever they're calling these days?
You're gonna be. I was just talking to our guitarist in my band about my lack of knowledge about things outside of the Earth. So I probably won't be able to help you, but
They have too?
that's what you have to have fun with, right? Yeah. So tell me, what's your question? I don't know if I can help.
I was whether or not it's in its orbit, if it's getting closer to us, or
I'm Philadelphia. I'm digging in the dirt. So, yeah, you would be.
how do you talk to people who think that, or who don't want to allow that that's us? But, you know, I thought Stephen Jay Gould's challenge what if several species of humans had survived and some of us were smarter than others? What would we do?
Yeah.
Or what would the other ones do with us? And
I give people, you know, all the time. The first couple talks that I gave in Carney, I got the stink eye from some people. You know, about talking about evolution and talking about the antiquity of the Earth. So definitely people who believe in a young Earth, and it is a very real thing. So everywhere I go, I experience it. So. And then, you know, the best thing to do is to look for commonality and don't engage people in a battle. So if you look at common ground, that's the only way to do it. In my experience, is to talk about things that we believe that are similar and not the things that are disparate. So but it's you want to. Initially, I wanted to battle. It's like, you know what, this scientific person says that you're wrong. You know? But that's not a great way to do it. So, if you look for commonality, that's the best. It's a challenge, though. Thank you for coming.
Let me tell you, my name is Natalie Lewis, and I am on the school board, but I met Gary at our summer fest. And thank you so much.
That was fun.
For us to have access to this amazing man and the work that he does, I love it. And I brought the idea, and Gary agreed to come and talk to us. And when I listened to him talk, I listened from so many different perspectives. I wonder about the little Garys that are sitting in our classrooms right now, and are we boring them to death, or we deter, you know, are we, like, I just wonder about them, and how do we educate them. When I listened to your talk and looked at all those, I don't even know what you say you want to grow up to be, and what college degree and career, and how do you end up there. I looked at all of the different materials you use, and how do you even get to know the right materials with the weight, and I mean, it's just so much science there. I look at the history, and even how I would have paid attention a lot more if I could have learned about, even though I didn't want to do it, just learn about it in this way. So I just encourage you as educators to just keep pushing, keep trying. I also think about myself. I did MIT undergrad, chemical engineering, got to senior year and didn't want to be a chemical engineer because I discovered I had a creative side to me. Did not know that was creativity in and of itself. So ended up getting my degree, working 3 years, and then going back and getting an MBA and going into marketing because I was creative. I didn't know. So I just think about all our kids over and see all of us and our kids. So thank you so much. And I'm excited, and I can't wait to see what comes of this. And I promise you, I will be stalking your website to figure out that screen. Those tickets are going to go fast. All right? Figure out that opening for your studio. But thank you.
Sure.
Thanks for being here.